Number 10. The Killer on the Road. My mother rarely talks about the scariest night of her life, but the lesson from it still echoes in our family. In 1972, when she was just 17, she was walking home from her after-school job along a quiet road at dusk. A tan Volkswagen Beetle pulled up beside her, and the handsome driver offered her a ride. He looked to be in his mid-20s, charming smile, well-dressed. But something in Mom's gut twisted with unease. She didn't know why, but alarm bells rang in her mind. She politely declined. The man drove ahead, then circled back a minute later, insisting it wasn't safe for a young lady to walk alone. Mom felt a chill and again said no, walking a bit faster. He persisted, driving slowly beside her, growing agitated that she wouldn't get in. Finally, after she firmly said her father was a police officer, a lie born of desperation, the man's friendly facade fell. His eyes went cold. He sped off with a frustrated scowl. Mom ran the remaining 2 blocks home, shaken but relieved. It wasn't until years later, when the news broke, that she realized who that had been. Ted Bundy, one of America's most infamous serial killers. The description, the car, the timing, it all matched. Mum's intuition and maybe divine protection had saved her life. She often tells me how she whispered Alhamdulillah when she recognized his face on TV years afterward, knowing how narrowly she escaped. Now, every time I think of taking a shortcut or ignoring a strange feeling of dread, I remember her story. It's a disturbing truth that evil often masquerades with a friendly smile. Trusting your instincts isn't just a cliché. It can literally be the difference between life and death. Mom survived that encounter, but it left a permanent mark on her psyche. She prays before every journey and taught us to do the same, to ask Allah for guidance and safety, because sometimes the only warning you get is a whisper from within, and you ignore it at your peril. Number 9. The Face at the Window. Jason grew up in a small town, the kind of safe community where people left doors unlocked. In his sophomore year of high school, that sense of security was shattered. One winter night, Jason was gaming late in his bedroom, the only light coming from his computer screen. Around 1 a.m., he felt the eerie sensation of being watched. He glanced over his shoulder toward the window behind him and nearly fell out of his chair. Pressed against the glass was the pale face of a man, eyes wide and unblinking, watching Jason intently. The man's breath fogged the glass as he gave a slow, unnerving smile. Jason's heart dropped into his stomach. He recognized the face. It was Mr. Collins, their odd neighbor from 3 houses down, a man in his 50s known for his reclusive behavior. Panicking, Jason leapt up with a yell, which caused the face to disappear from the window. He heard leaves crunch as Collins darted. Away! Jason woke his parents, voice shaking, and they called the police. When officers went to Collins's house, he wouldn't come out. After a brief standoff, what they found inside was beyond disturbing. Collins had a shrine of photographs of neighborhood kids in his living room, and there were candid photos of Jason taken through that very window on multiple nights. Even creepier, police discovered a trapdoor in Collins's floor, leading to a bunker-like crawl space. In it were crumpled sleeping bags, rope, duct tape, and dozens of candy wrappers. It looked like he'd been planning to kidnap someone. Jason realized, with a sickening jolt, that Collins might have originally intended to snatch him that night if he hadn't noticed the peering face in time. Collins was arrested and eventually charged for plotting something heinous. The shockwaves in the community were immense. Parents kept their kids indoors for weeks. As for Jason, he couldn't sleep for months without the curtains drawn tight and a light on. He'd wake up in sweat-soaked terror, imagining those eyes at the window. Therapy and prayer slowly helped him feel safe again. His parents would recite, verses of protection with him each night, which gave him the strength to close his eyes and sleep. To this day, Jason can't stand uncovered windows at night. What he saw in that split second saved him from a fate too horrible to contemplate. The horrifying incident taught everyone a dark lesson. True evil can lurk in the most mundane places, even in the face of a neighbor you thought you knew. Number 8. Terror in the Attic. Newlyweds, Nina and Omar were excited to move into an old, fixer-upper house in the city. It had charm, history, and as they soon discovered, a hidden occupant. For the first few weeks, everything was bliss as they settled in. Then Nina began noticing odd occurrences. Food missing from the pantry, the back door found unlocked when they were sure they'd locked it, strange creaking noises at odd hours. Omar teased that the house was training them with its quirks, but Nina's unease grew. One night she was alone doing laundry when she heard soft footsteps above her, coming from the attic. Her heart hammered. The old house was creaky, sure, but those footsteps were deliberate. Trying to be rational, Nina told herself it might be raccoons or squirrels nesting up there. She grabbed a broom and decided to check, more annoyed than scared at this point. She climbed the attic ladder, pushed open the creaking hatch, and aimed her flashlight around. The beam landed on something that shouldn't be there, a nest of blankets and pillows in the corner, plus food wrappers, water bottles, and even a small lantern. It looked like someone had been living there. Nina's blood ran cold. In that very moment, from behind a stack of old boxes, a figure suddenly bolted toward her. Nina screamed as a man barreled past, practically knocking her off the ladder as he fled down through the house. In a flash, he was out the back door. Trembling, Nina got a brief glimpse. Lanky, dirty clothes, wild hair. Police later identified him as a homeless man who had likely been secretly residing in the vacant house before they moved in, and decided to stay, unknown to the new owners. He'd been living in their attic for weeks, sneaking down when they were out or asleep to eat from their kitchen. The realization was a sucker punch of horror for the couple. All those times they relaxed downstairs, a stranger was hiding just above them, listening. Nina felt violated, her sanctuary breached. She struggled with nightmares of the man creeping down the attic ladder to watch them at night. Every bump in the night became a threat. Omar, equally shaken, reinforced all the locks and added an alarm system. They also took comfort in nightly a dua, praying for protection and the feeling of safety to return to their home. In time it did, but the disturbing knowledge remained. A stranger living under your roof is a special kind of terror. The incident left them much more cautious. Now they thoroughly inspect any new place they stay, from basements to attics and behind every door, knowing that sometimes the worst threats hide in plain sight, just overhead. Number 7. The good night call. Sometimes what starts as a harmless routine can turn into a chilling ordeal. Consider the story of Layla, a college student who called her parents every night to say goodnight. One evening, around 10 p.m., Layla was on the phone with her mum, recounting her day. She lived off campus in a small studio apartment. As she chatted, she casually mentioned, "I'm going to make some tea, hold on," and set the phone down without hanging up. In the kitchen, which was just around the corner from her living area, she boiled water and steeped her tea. Returning to her phone, she was puzzled to hear a second voice on the line. Her mom was on, but who was the male voice speaking? "Who's with you, Mom?" Layla asked, thinking maybe her dad picked up the other line. Her mother's voice came through, tense and confused. "Sweetie, that's what I was about to ask you. Who was that man just now talking near you?" Layla's blood turned to ice. There was no man in her apartment, at least none she knew of. He said, "Just a minute. I'm almost done here." Very clearly, her mom whispered, her voice urgent. In an instant, Layla realized someone must be in the apartment, someone who spoke while she was away from the phone. someone her mom could hear through Layla's phone. A surge of dread hit her as she surveyed her tiny studio. The closet door was slightly ajar when she was sure it had been closed earlier. Heart pounding so loudly she thought she might faint, Layla grabbed her keys and, as softly as possible, stepped out the front door of her apartment. She didn't even bother with shoes. Once outside, she burst into tears of panic, whispering into the phone, "Mom, call the police! Someone's in here!" Police arrived within minutes and cautiously entered the apartment. Layla waited in the safety of a neighbor's place, trembling and praying, "Please, God, protect me." The officers emerged with a disheveled man in handcuffs, a known local vagrant. In his pocket, they found one of Layla's necklaces and some cash he had swiped from her drawers. Chillingly, it appeared he'd been hiding in her closet from the moment Layla got home, waiting for an opportunity to slip out. When they interrogated him, he claimed he was just going to take what he could and leave quietly. The thing that made Layla's stomach churn: he had watched and listened to her for at least 20 minutes before being discovered. The male voice Layla's mother heard? The intruder had accidentally muttered to himself, thinking Layla wasn't in earshot. If her mother hadn't been on the phone to hear it, who knows how long he would have lurked or what he might have done. Layla moved out immediately, unable to spend another night there. The thought that a stranger stood mere feet away in the dark while she was vulnerable remains the most disturbing experience of her life. She still calls her mom every night, but now it's not just to say good night. It's to reassure both of them that she's safely alone. And every night before that call, Layla triple-checks every closet, nook and cranny of her space, whispering prayers of gratitude that on that fateful evening, a simple phone call and a mother's intuition thwarted what could have been a tragedy. Number 6. Red Hoodie in the Woods. When I was a kid, my family lived near a large wooded park in our town. My cousin Sarah, who was 14 at the time, loved to jog on the trails there in the afternoons. One evening, she came home pale and shaking with a story that sounded like something out of a thriller. As she told it, Sarah had been running her usual route, the sun hanging low and golden between the trees. She noticed the man in the red hoodie about 2 miles in. He was leaning against a tree, seemingly tying his shoe. She paid him little mind and jogged past. But minutes later, she got the uneasy feeling of being followed. Footsteps echoed hers on the leaf-strewn path. She glanced back and saw the red-hoodied figure about 50 feet behind, walking briskly. A chill ran through her. Maybe he was just another jogger, she thought. She picked up her pace. The trail ahead was empty and quiet. After a few minutes, she stole another glance behind. Her pursuer had halved the distance and was power-walking, eyes fixed on her. Alarm bells rang loud. In Zara's head, she knew she was still at least a mile from any exit or neighborhood. Acting on instinct, Sarah did something clever. She feigned a muscle cramp. She slowed to a stop, pretending to wince and stretch her calf, hoping the man would pass her. He didn't. Instead, he stopped too, just far enough away to not seem odd, but definitely not passing. He pretended to admire the scenery, but she saw his eyes darting toward her. Fear mounting, Sarah resumed jogging, now at a sprint. The man in the red hoodie broke into a run. That was all the confirmation she needed. He was after her. Sarah's lungs burned as she tore down the path, the sound of pounding steps growing louder. In a panic, she veered off the trail, crashing through bushes, hoping to lose him in the thick woods. Adrenaline surged through her as she zigzagged between trees. Behind her, she heard the man cursing, branches snapping as he gave chase off-trail. This is real. This is happening, she thought, terror fueling her legs. In this moment of pure fear, Sarah later recalled, she was praying non-stop under her breath, begging God to give her speed. She spotted a small ravine up ahead. Beyond it, through the trees, she glimpsed the roof of a park maintenance shed or restroom. Summoning every ounce of strength, Sarah hurtled down the ravine and scrambled up the other side. The man's footsteps faltered behind her with the sudden change of terrain. Reaching the shed, she finally saw another person, an older woman walking her dog, just emerging from a trailhead nearby. Gasping and in tears, Sarah ran straight toward the stunned woman, yelling for help. The dog barked wildly at Sarah's dramatic appearance. When Sarah dared to look back, the man in the red hoodie had vanished among the trees, not wanting to confront or witness. Sarah collapsed, sobbing, as the woman hurried to comfort her and call the police. Although officers scoured the area, they didn't find the man. Sarah gave them a description. Mid-30s, scruffy beard, red hoodie, dark pants. No one was ever caught. The incident haunted our family. For months, Sarah refused to go anywhere alone, traumatized by how a peaceful run nearly turned into something out of a nightmare. To this day, she believes divine intervention put that dog walker on the path at just the right moment. If that woman hadn't been there, we shudder to think what could have happened. Sarah eventually returned to jogging, but never without a partner and always carrying pepper spray. And she prays for safety before every run. This disturbing close call taught all of us that danger can hunt you in broad daylight, in places you considered safe. It's a frightening reality, but being aware, prepared and trusting that intuition and a bit of dua for protection can make all the difference. Number 5, the school basement secret. Some true stories are disturbing not for sudden terror, but for the slow dawning of horror as you realize someone you trusted isn't who they seem. Take the story of Mr. Harris, our middle school's janitor. When I was in 8th grade, he was a quiet, middle-aged man who always wore a blue baseball cap and had a small, polite smile. He'd worked at the school for years. We barely noticed him as he mopped halls or fixed lights. One autumn, rumors started among students that strange noises were coming from the old fallout shelter in the school's basement. Our school was old, with a network of maintenance tunnels and storage rooms below ground level. We'd hear what sounded like faint music and thuds when passing a certain hallway. Once, during an after-school event, a friend swore he heard a scream from down there, but teachers brushed it off as teenage imagination. Then a student named Kevin went missing. He was a 7th grader, last seen after detention one evening. The whole town searched. Police got involved. Days passed with no sign of Kevin. We were terrified. Was there a kidnapper around? A week later, a tense hush fell over morning classes. Kevin was found, weak but alive, and the truth was horrifying. It turned out Mr. Harris, the janitor, had a hideous secret. Beneath the school, he had converted a disused storage room into a makeshift prison of sorts. He'd kidnapped Kevin after detention, lured him under the pretense of needing help, then locked him in. The noises we heard, poor Kevin trying to bang on pipes for attention, and Mr. Harris playing loud music to cover the sounds. The police only found him because a teacher recalled seeing Mr. Harris and Kevin together that day, and officers confronted the janitor while searching the school. Mr. Harris cracked and revealed the boy's location. The shock that fell on our community was absolute. The kindly janitor had been a predator living right among us. He later confessed he'd planned to keep Kevin as some sort of twisted companion since he lived alone and had issues we couldn't fathom. Our blood ran cold thinking about how many times we kids had been alone in hallways with that man, or how easily it could have been any of us. Kevin recovered physically, but he was deeply traumatized. For a long time he couldn't return to school, especially knowing it hid the scene of his nightmare. Counselors helped him, and all of us come to terms with what happened. The school installed better security, and of course, Mr. Harris went to prison for a very long time. This true story disturbed us not with gore or ghosts, but with the betrayal of trust. We learned evil doesn't always look evil. Sometimes it's wearing a friendly face and a uniform, holding a mop. We learned to be more cautious about who we trust and to look out for one another. For me, I began saying a small prayer, each morning before school, asking for protection, a habit I carry to this day. It's sobering to know that a place as ordinary as a school basement held such darkness. Kevin's ordeal became a quiet legend in our town, a permanent reminder that the unthinkable can hide in the most familiar places, and that vigilance, and perhaps a whisper of guidance from above, can save lives. Number 4. Stranger on the Stairwell. A young woman named Farah used to work late at an office in downtown Chicago. Often, she'd be the last one out in the evening. One winter night, she left around 9 p.m. The building's elevators were under maintenance, so she headed for the stairwell, 7 flights down to the lobby. The stairwell was stark and silent, every footstep echoing. A few floors down, the heavy door clanged far above, as if someone else had entered from an upper floor. Farah paused, listening. Faint footsteps followed, a floor or two behind her, perhaps a security guard or another worker, she thought. She continued downward, but unease crept in when the footsteps sped up, growing louder. To test her suspicion, Farah stopped mid-flight. Sure enough, the trailing footsteps halted too, somewhere above, out of sight. Her mouth went dry. This was no coincidence. She started moving again, faster, her low heels clacking on the concrete steps. The person behind her hastened as well. She heard them closing in, the sound gaining on her echo by echo. Fear gripped her. At this rate, they'd catch up before she hit the lobby. Farah made a split-second decision. On the next landing, instead of continuing down, she quietly slipped through the fire door onto the 3rd floor. Thankfully, it was unlocked. She eased it shut without letting it slam and flattened herself against the wall, just out of sight of the small door window. Seconds later, she heard heavy breathing and footsteps storm past on the stairs, continuing downward. Through the window, she glimpsed a blur of a figure in a dark hoodie rushing by. Heart in her throat, Farah waited a minute. Whoever it was must have thought she sprinted faster out of the stairwell. Summoning courage, she peered out. The stairwell below was empty. The pursuer likely ran out to the lobby or lower floors in confusion. Farah immediately called building security from her cell and explained in hushed whispers. An officer came to escort her the rest of the way. In the lobby, revolving red and blue lights greeted them. Security had actually detained a man loitering just outside, sweating and agitated. Farah's blood went cold when she saw what he clutched, a folding knife. The man had no identification and gave a flimsy story about meeting a friend in the building after hours. Police took him in, and it turned out he had a history of assaults. The officers told Farah her quick thinking likely saved her from something terrible. She broke down in tears once safely in her car, thanking Allah for the split-second inspiration to duck aside. Nowadays, Farah never takes stairwells, alone if she can help it, and she always leaves work with a co-worker or asks security for accompaniment. The disturbingly close call taught her that predators can be anywhere, even in the mundane routine of leaving work. Every day she's grateful that a quiet intuition, perhaps an angel's whisper, guided her to step off that stairwell when she did. It's a reminder that in moments of danger, staying calm and using your wits with a dose of divine mercy can turn the tables on those who mean harm. Number 3. The Hotel Horror. During a cross-country drive, a man named Carlos checked into a roadside motel for the night. It was a nondescript place off the highway, the kind you find in any small town. Exhausted, he got his room key, room 104, and headed down the dim exterior corridor. As he inserted the key, the door popped open, slightly ajar. Odd, he thought. Maybe housekeeping didn't close it fully. He stepped in cautiously and flicked on the light. The room seemed made up, bed tidy, nothing amiss. Shrugging it off, Carlos locked the door, slid the security chain, and collapsed onto the bed without even undressing. Around 2 a.m., he awoke to a faint scratching sound. Disoriented, he turned on the bedside lamp. The room was quiet, Probably a tree branch on the window, he reasoned. He was about to drift back to sleep when he heard a soft click and the slightest creak. The doorknob was twisting, pushing against the security chain. In a flash, Carlos was fully awake, heart pounding. Someone was at the door, trying to get in silently. The chain clanked as it held. Carlos leapt up and shouted, "Who's there?" There was a long pause. Then a male voice, eerily calm, whispered through the gap, "Oh, sorry, my mistake." Carlos rushed to the door, just in time to catch a glimpse through the gap of a figure in a dark jacket walking away briskly. Adrenaline surging, he slammed the door shut and double-checked the lock and chain. Only then did the chilling realization hit him. Whoever that was had a key to his room and was trying to be quiet, meaning it was likely not a fellow guest, but someone with access, perhaps the motel manager or an employee. Carlos's mind raced. Why would the manager try to enter at 2 a.m. without knocking? Nothing good crossed his mind. Heart still hammering, he pushed a dresser in front of the door for extra measure and grabbed the phone to call the front desk. No answer, just endless ringing. Feeling utterly vulnerable, Carlos scanned the room for anything to use as a weapon and sat awake the rest of the night, a chair propped against the door as well. At first light, he went to the lobby and found the lone desk attendant, the same man who'd checked him in. Confronting him, Carlos demanded to know why he tried to enter. The attendant's eyes widened in genuine confusion, or a performance. "I wasn't in your room. I've been here all night," he insisted. When Carlos pressed, mentioning the key, the attendant simply said, "Only 2 people have access to masters, me and the owner. And the owner isn't here at night." Unnerved and unable to prove anything, Carlos left in haste, feeling that staying longer was unsafe. As he drove off, he spotted something that made his stomach flip. From behind the motel, a man emerged carrying trash bags to the dumpster, wearing the same dark jacket he'd seen outside his door. It was the owner. His photo had been in the lobby. The man paused and watched emotionlessly as Carlos drove away. Carlos called the police once he was safely down the road. He later learned that they found nothing actionable at the motel, no surveillance cameras, and of course the owner denied any involvement. But a year later, that motel was shut down after a female guest went missing from her room, and the owner was investigated for multiple suspicious incidents. Carlos will never know for sure how close he was to becoming a victim of whatever evil was afoot in room 104 that night. But he thanks God for the cheap security chain that forced the intruder to retreat and for waking him up at just the right moment. Now, every time he stays at a hotel, he wedges a doorstop under the door and offers a prayer for protection. This disturbing encounter taught him that sometimes the places meant to be restful harbors can hide predators in plain sight, and a mix of caution, gut instinct, and faith is the best protection one can have. Number 2. Cry for help. In a quiet, suburban neighborhood, an elderly woman named Fatima lived alone. She was friendly and known to everyone on the block. One night, neighbors awoke to the sound of blood-curdling screams coming from Fatima's house. Multiple people called 911, and a few brave neighbors ran toward the home. The front door was slightly open. Inside, they found a scene of chaos, furniture knocked over, a lamp shattered. Fatima was nowhere in sight, but droplets of blood led from the living room toward the back door. Police arrived within minutes and followed the trail into the backyard and beyond, where it disappeared at the end of the block near an alley. It was clear a struggle had taken place, and Fatima had likely been abducted. The entire community was terrified and heartbroken. Who would do this to a sweet grandmother? The next 48 hours were frantic. Law enforcement combed the area, and volunteers handed out flyers. Finally, a break. A witness came forward who recalled seeing a maintenance van parked oddly in the alley around that time. That clue led police to a 32-year-old handyman who had done work for several people in the neighborhood, including Fatima. When they brought him in for questioning, the man panicked and eventually confessed. He had tried to rob Fatima, thinking the old lady would be an easy target with cash hidden at home. When she resisted, he got violent and dragged her away. Under pressure, he revealed where he left her, bound and gagged in an abandoned shed miles away, out in the country. Rescuers rushed to the location and found Fatima alive, though dehydrated, bruised and deeply traumatized. The shed was off a dirt road, isolated. If the man hadn't confessed, it's unlikely she would have been found in time. The whole neighborhood rejoiced when Fatima was brought back, and there were tears, even from hardened detectives. But the incident left a permanent scar on everyone's sense of safety. Fatima herself, once very independent, never again stayed. Alone at night, her children moved her in with them after that. She spoke of the ordeal only once, saying that during those dark hours tied up in the cold shed, she never stopped praying. She recited every Quranic verse and supplication she knew, fighting the waves of despair. She believed with all her heart that those prayers kept her alive and gave her the strength not to give up. And remarkably, she forgave her attacker in time, saying she didn't want hate to poison her remaining years. This story shook us all. It was evidence that real-life horror isn't just the stuff of movies or far-off places. It can erupt in our very backyards. We took away some hard lessons. Be vigilant even in safe neighborhoods. Look out for one another. It was the rapid neighbor response and witness tip that cracked the case. And most poignantly, we saw the power of faith and forgiveness. In Fatima's survival, the screams of that night still echo in some neighbors' minds, a disturbing reminder of how quickly peace can shatter. But so too does Fatima's steadfast faith echo, reminding us that even in the direst captivity, the hope in Allah's mercy can light a path to freedom. Number 1, the protective presence. My final story is one my father told me, and it still gives me chills. When he was a teenager, he worked evenings at a small convenience store in our town. One night, he was closing up around midnight. The streets were empty as he locked the front door and started his walk home, which was just a few blocks away. As he passed an alley, 3 men emerged, casual and smiling. They asked him for a light. My father, sensing something was off, apologized that he didn't have one and kept walking. The men followed, their friendly veneer quickly dropping. They started encircling him, making lewd comments about the few dollars he might have, taunting that maybe he should hand it over. My dad was young, slender, and outnumbered. Fear clenched his stomach. Suddenly, one of the men grabbed his arm. Before my father could react, a deep, booming voice echoed from behind them. "Let him go, now!" The 3 strangers turned. My father turned too, and he saw a huge man standing in the shadows a few yards away. This man was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat. He stepped forward and repeated in an icy tone, "You heard me, let him go." For a moment, the 3 aggressors sized up this newcomer. Though outnumbered, the man looked strong and carried himself like someone not afraid to throw a punch. After a tense beat, the one holding Dad's arm released it. With some muttered insults, the trio slunk back into the alley, deciding it wasn't worth it. My father exhaled, adrenaline still coursing. He turned to thank the stranger, but the big man in the coat was already walking away in the opposite direction. Dad called out, asking the man's name or if he lived nearby. The figure merely raised a hand in a sort of wave and vanished around a corner. Incredibly, my father never saw that man again. He asked around the neighborhood describing his giant guardian angel, but no one knew of such a person fitting that description. To this day, Dad is convinced that the stranger was sent by Allah exactly when needed. Perhaps an angel in human form, perhaps just a good Samaritan, but in any case, a protector when danger loomed. The disturbing part of this true story is How close my father came to serious harm that night. The inspiring part is that something intervened. It instilled in him and me, hearing it, a profound belief that if you strive to do right and call out to Allah in times of need, help can arrive. In miraculous ways. Every so often when I'm walking alone and feel nervous, I think of that story. I utter a quiet Bismillah and imagine a protective presence watching over me too. It might sound fanciful to skeptics, but as these 10 stories show, reality can be far scarier and sometimes far more mysterious than fiction. Through serial killers narrowly missed, intruders thwarted, stalkers evaded, and inexplicable rescues, we're reminded that this world is brimming with both peril and protection. Each disturbing tale is a caution to stay alert and prepared for the worst, but also to nurture faith in the unseen help that may be around the corner. In the darkest of nights and the strangest of circumstances, we are never truly alone.